necessary for this initiative?
As I said, my approval was not necessary for this initiative. It certainly wasn't wrong for them to check if they wanted to. I wasn't insulted that they did, or I wouldn't have been insulted that they did, but it wasn't part of the necessary steps. Often we get things for information. Oh, by the way, the minister is going to approve this. You should know about it, but it's within his or her authority to do. This is for information, not decision for you. Those are notes that we receive regularly that obviously when they're relevant or germane, they get dealt with either through the office or directly to me. But in this case, the authority was not importance to them that was stalled. And therefore, as you pointed out, they were not acted on in my office.
Why was your approval being sought, do you think? Like, was your approval necessary for this initiative?
As I said, my approval was not necessary for this initiative. It certainly wasn't wrong for them to check if they wanted to. I wasn't insulted that they did, or I wouldn't have been insulted that they did, but it wasn't part of the necessary steps. Often we get things for information. Oh, by the way, the minister is going to approve this. You should know about it, but it's within his or her authority to do. This is for information, not decision for you. Those are notes that we receive regularly that obviously when they're relevant or germane, they get dealt with either through the office or directly to me. But in this case, the authority was not necessarily mine to give.
Okay. And
importance to them that was stalled. And therefore, as you pointed out, they were not acted on in my office.
why was your approval being sought, do you think? Like, was your approval necessary for this initiative?
As I said, my approval was not necessary for this initiative. It certainly wasn't wrong for them to check if they wanted to. I wasn't insulted that they did, or I wouldn't have been insulted that they did, but it wasn't part of the necessary steps. Often we get things for information. Oh, by the way, the minister is going to approve this. You should know about it, but it's within his or her authority to do. This is for information, not decision for you. Those are notes that we receive regularly that obviously when they're relevant or germane, they get dealt with either through the office or directly to me. But in this case, the authority was not necessarily mine to give.
Okay, and would it have fallen to a minister, for the Minister of Public Safety, for instance?
I mean, it could have, or the CSIS could have checked in with its minister. The Minister of Public Safety is directly the minister that oversees and is responsible for CSIS. I know that the director of CSIS has direct access to the Minister of Public Safety in a very regular way. If there have been concerns around this, the CSIS director could have gone to the minister either for a signals check or for help in moving it through the approvals process in the Prime Minister's office, or to even check that maybe I should just go straight to the Sergeant at Arms in Parliament to actually take on this briefing. And as far as I know, CSIS did not bring up this with even its own minister.
Okay.
I have one question, Mr. the Prime Minister.
Oui.
Do you have any idea why no reply was ever given to all of those that requested the authorization?
Well, I think as was stated in the first case, it was in process when COVID happened and we all moved to different priorities and virtually. In other cases, in the third case, it actually didn't get to my office. In the second case, no, I don't know why.
Okay, because if an authorization is asked from your office and no authorization is needed, at least in your view, usually do you, not you personally, but your office give the information to the person requesting the authorization, or not at all?
It depends on the amount of the amount of notes, the various priorities of them as they go through. I really can't speak to the challenges around that particular one, other than saying that I was always very clear that briefings to parliamentarians is a good thing.
Thank you.
Okay, the next possibly related, possibly not topic I want to talk about is ministerial accountability in the foreign interference space. So if we can bring up CAN 030999. Prime Minister, these are notes. This is not something you would have seen. This is notes or minutes from DMFI, which is Deputy Ministers on Foreign Interference Committee meeting in April 2023. And if we can just scroll down so we can see the third and fourth bullet there. The NSI at the time here was Jody Thomas, and this is a discussion that was had at that meeting on essentially where ministerial accountabilities lie in the foreign interference space. So if we see that, I think it's the third bullet on the page, the NSI mentioned that the day before public safety, the clerk and deputy clerk had a discussion about foreign interference, during which the clerk mentioned that the ISR, so this is in the period where the independent special rapporteur was doing his work, it seems as though they're comfortable with the panel in sight, but what's becoming more obvious is gaps on how FI is handled between elections, specifically what's the role of deputies, staff, and where's the ministerial accountability more broadly. The second bullet then says, as a result, the NSIA has asked PCO to begin work on mapping this. So how is intelligence circulated? How are ministers informed? How do they exercise their ministerial accountability? The governance, she says, seems to work well at the deputy level and even between PM and PMO, but that gap at the ministerial level may be a concern. So we discussed this a bit with the NSI at the time, Jody Thomas, and what she said about this, and the reference for the record is at WIT 151, paragraph 81. I won't bring it up, but I'll just tell you about it. The conversation around ministerial accountability was that in the NSI COP and NCRA reports, as well as the media leak discussions, everything needs to go to the PM. But in fact, in a Westminster style of government, ministers have accountabilities. So that was the nature of the discussion that was being had at this meeting. From your perspective, how does this play out? Was there an issue with ministerial accountability in the foreign interference space?
I think what you're outlining is sort of the second part of the conversation. The first part of the conversation is clear to me, and I can't really speak to what Jody was sort of digging into there. But it's very clear from the first bullet the gaps on how FI is handled in between elections. I think the important thing to remember is when we created the site task force, the panel of 5, it is because during an election, during the writ period, the government is in caretaker mode. So there actually are significant limits on how and whether ministers and prime minister will continue to be ministers or prime ministers even during an election. But they are limited in what they can actually go out and say, particularly if they're about to say that an opposition party is compromised or benefiting from interference by a third country in an election context. That would be destabilizing and you know of concern to do. That's why we set up the panel of 5 top public servants to be able to address during a writ period and publicly speak to what a particular piece of foreign interference is trying to have as its impact on an election. That makes total sense as a structure during elections, but during a by-election, where we've actually made sure that the site looks in on that, you don't have a caretaker convention. During a by-election, the government continues to be the government. The Minister of Public Safety or Foreign Affairs or the Prime Minister continue to be fully empowered to do all their works. And therefore, it would be during a by-election, if there was a significant concern that a particular country was engaging in massive misinformation, disinformation, it would normally be the minister who would do that, who would talk about that and be accountable for that communications and those actions. But because of the partisan nature of the event that is a by-election, there's a discussion on, well, whether that ministerial accountability should be there around that, or whether officials should take on the communications, even though it's that perhaps had its most clear moment in the G20 meeting in Indonesia, where I directly informed Premier Xi that he needed to make sure that China ceased interfering into Canada, into Canadian democracy. It wasn't a conversation that went particularly well, but it was a conversation that needed to be had and that we had. However, despite that and many other messages to China, the interference continued and even in some cases increased. So that was part of the reason why we needed to make sure there was a clear consequence. Secondly, as we looked into it, as the allegations around Michael Chong were surfaced publicly, on digging into it with the Foreign Affairs Ministry here in Canada, it was clear that even though in the case of Michael Chong, Zhao Wei was not engaged in interference so much as influence, that is, regular diplomatic collection of information with the goal of sanctioning, for example. So in the case of Michael Chong, not direct interference in the analysis of our intelligence agencies, but in other cases had been involved in interference activities. We realized that that was a reason to look at kicking him out of the country, that he was involved and known to be involved in foreign interference, even if it wasn't directly in the case of Michael Chong. And third, the fact that there needed to be consequences for China. He'd been involved in foreign interference activities. And third, it had been made public, meant that he was also not going to be able to operate as a regular diplomat in Canada anymore. His utility as a diplomat to both Canada and I guess to China had ended because he was so clearly outed in the media as being a bad actor. Those three things together meant that to give a consequence to China, to give consequences on foreign interference, and specifically the fact that he was not going to be much use as a diplomat anymore, we chose to kick him out of the country.
Okay. I'm going to move now.
And actually, I think we asked China to remove him from the country first, and when they didn't, we said, okay, well then we're going to have to kick him out.
Okay, so one last chance, and then he was gone. Move now to another event that led to the PNGing of a diplomat, this time an Indian diplomat, which is the murder of Hardeep Singh Najjar. I'll ask the court registrar to pull up WIT 106, please. So there's a few things to talk about in this, and if we can scroll down to paragraphs 52 to 55, please. There we go. So the first question I'll ask you to take us through, Prime Minister, is what led to your announcement in the House of Commons in September 2023?
Over the course of the summer, I was apprised by my intelligence services that there was credible intelligence that agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Najjar. this is something that we had actually asked the intelligence agencies to look into, because following the rather high-profile killing months before, the initial assessment was, oh, this was gang-related or criminal-related. There was not an obvious, immediate international nexus to this. And that's how we were briefed after the meeting, after the killing in the days afterwards. However, hearing directly from a number of our South Asian members of parliament and seeing and talking with members of the South Asian community around who were quite insistent that it was something that was likely connected to government of India. We actually asked the intelligence agencies, and it turned out they were doing this anyway, to look in more closely to the circumstances around this particular murder. So in late July, early August, I was briefed on the fact that there was intelligence from Canada and possibly from Five Eyes allies that made it fairly clear, incredibly clear, that India was involved in this killing. Agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil. This was something that we obviously had to take extremely seriously. That violation of sovereignty, of the international rule of law, with extrajudicial killing in a foreign country, in a fellow democracy, was a massive mistake if India had indeed done it, and we had reasons to believe that they had. So our immediate approach was to engage with the government of India to say, and we had our various security officials reach out to India and say, look, there are real concerns that your security agencies were involved in the killing of Nijar. We need to work on this together because that can't stand. We need to make sure that there are changes and there's accountability for this process, but let's try and do it in a responsible way that doesn't come and blow up the relationship between Canada and India. And that was the attempts we made in the month of August. As we approached the end of August and September, the big thing that was happening was India was itself hosting the leader of the summit of the advanced economies of the world, the G20. So it was a big moment for India, welcoming the world, all the leaders of the world to Delhi for a very important summit. And we had the opportunity of making it a very uncomfortable summit for India if we went public with these allegations ahead of time. We chose not to. We chose to continue to work behind the scenes to try and get India to cooperate with us. Their asks of us was, well, how much do you know? Give us the evidence you have on this. And our response was, well, it's within your security agencies. You should be looking into how much they know. You should be engaging us. Oh, no, tell us what you know. Show us the evidence. And at that point, it was primarily intelligence, not hard evidentiary proof. So we said, well, let's work together and look into your security services and maybe we can get that done. No, we're not doing that. It culminated with a conversation I had with Prime Minister Modi on after the end of the last session at the G20 in Delhi, where I sat down and shared that we knew that they were involved and expressed a real concern around it. He responded with the usual response from him, which is that we have people who are outspoken against the Indian government living in Canada that he would like to see arrested. And I tried to explain that freedom of speech and freedom of people who come to our country to be Canadians to criticize governments overseas is, or indeed to criticize the Canadian government, is a fundamental freedom of Canada. But as always, we would work with them on any evidence or any concerns they have around terrorism or incitement to hate or anything that is patently unacceptable in Canada. And we have taken action in the past. We continue to take action. Even as I emphasize, and I have emphasized regularly, my position and Canada's position is to defend the territorial integrity of India. One India is official Canadian policy. And the fact that there are a number of people in Canada who advocate otherwise does not make it Canadian policy, but also does not make it, is not something that is illegal in Canada. Having done all that, we returned to Canada, and it was obvious that the Indian government response, particularly through the media, was to instead attack Canada, to attack Canadians, to criticize us, to undermine our government and our governance, and quite frankly, the integrity of our democracy. Combined with the fact that as we approached the end of September, it looked like there was going to be media stories detailing some of these allegations that were getting out there. When on the first day that the House returned, we determined that it was in the interest of public safety in Canada to let people know that we knew about these allegations, that we were following up on them. There was an investigation into them that was taken on by police services in Canada to ensure that, partially to ensure that nobody in Canada and any communities felt like they needed to take action themselves, that they should trust Canadian institutions to take this threat seriously and follow up on it. And that's exactly what we then did. We launched investigations. The Indian response to these allegations and to our investigations was to double down on attacks against this government, attacks against this government's integrity, attacks against Canada in general, but also to arbitrarily eject dozens of diplomats from Canada, from Canadian diplomats from India, on absolutely no cause other than to say, well, we don't like what you said in the House about us, and we're going to punish you for that. This was a situation in which we had clear, and certainly now even clearer, indications that India had violated Canada's sovereignty, and their response was to double down and attack Canada further rather than take responsibility or say, how can we fix this? Yes, this was a violation of the rule of law, and even take any of the many off-ramps we offered, because we don't want to be in this situation of picking a fight with a significant trading partner with whom we have deep people-to-people ties and a long history, and our fellow democracies. But standing up unequivocally for Canadian sovereignty and for the safety of Canadians back then was essential, and absolutely led to the very, very clear pronouncements we made earlier this week that the RCMP, the conclusions and the evidence that the RCMP determined in terms of violence towards Canadians that has been enabled by and directed by, in many cases, the Indian government.
So you've made reference to the allegations that were the announcement of the RCMP earlier this week, and we know that that wasn't solely connected to the Najjar investigation per se. It's a broader thing than that, and it involves allegations of interference by India in promotion of violent extremism, tying agents of the government of India to homicides, violent acts, the use of organized crime, and interference into democratic processes. So it's a much wider thing. And we know that it led to, over the past weekend, the PNGing of 6 Indian diplomats. what can you say? And you mentioned before that the hope was not to blow up the relationship with India after the Najar murder. Obviously, things have progressed since then. What comment are you able to offer on what the RCMP announced on Monday and where things stand at the moment?
The decision by the RCMP to go forward with that announcement was entirely anchored in public safety. And a goal of disrupting the chain of activities that was resulting in drive-by shootings, home invasions, and violent extortion and even murder in and across Canada, particularly in the South Asian community. Largely Sikh, but not exclusively the Sikh community. The goal of disrupting the chain that was diplomats collecting information on Canadians who are opponents or in disagreement with the Modi government, passing along that information to the highest levels within the Indian government, and then having that information directed through criminal organizations like the Lawrence Bishnoi gang to then result in violence against Canadians on the ground. It was the RCMP's determination that that chain or that sequence or that scheme needed to be disrupted, and going public on Monday as they did, and removing those diplomats. The first option was actually being able to question those diplomats and interview those diplomats by having them waive diplomatic immunity. They didn't. That's not surprising that they didn't. Canada wouldn't waive diplomatic immunity in many cases either. But therefore we had to ask them to leave the country.
Okay. And just to be clear, when you speak of diplomats collecting information in this instance, we're not talking about research and Google searches. We're talking about covert, clandestine,
coercive measures, threatening to withhold family visas, paying sources, a range of things that the RCMP can detail if they feel they are. I mean, one of the important things on this is these are ongoing. There are ongoing court cases and trials. So if the RCMP had its druthers, it wouldn't have revealed any of this. It's just that it hit the threshold before it came out naturally in court through our judicial process, as it would, as much of this will. But the threat to public safety and the need to disrupt preemptively, even before the court cases were fully adjudicated, made it the RCMP's decision to go public with this.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, there are ongoing investigations, and in that sense, I think we've probably gone as far as we can go on that topic. So we'll move on. We can take the Najar document down now. Going back to the chain of events, I think that we can say followed the May 2023 media leaks and the revelation of the PRC interest in Michael Chong. One thing that we know happened was that Minister Mendicino issued a ministerial directive on threats to the security of Canada directed at parliamentarians. And when we spoke about that initiative in camera, you expressed some ambivalence towards the policy. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about that.
I have very little doubt that had there been genuine threats, or there had been direct threats to Michael Chong or his family, that information would have been elevated to at least the Minister of Public Safety, if not directly to my office, on threats to a parliamentarian. But in the messiness of having a criminal leak erroneous information to the media and the attention and worries that ensued, I asked Minister Mendicino to put out a clear directive that said if there's any threats to parliamentarians or their families, that should be automatically elevated, regardless of whether they are credible or single source or reliable or unreliable or not. We need to elevate the attention that is given to parliamentarians' safety. I don't know that it's entirely necessary, if I'm being honest. I have confidence that if there is a threat to a parliamentarian, CSIS and our NSIA and our security apparatus would take it very seriously and make sure there was awareness and follow up on it. But in the moment, and to show Canadians how seriously we were taking this very serious issue, emitting this directive that said, yes, explicitly you have to do it, was a responsible step. I prefer to demonstrate confidence in the decision-making frame of intelligence agencies around how they elevate and how they evaluate information as, okay, this is really credible, we need to see this. This is not so credible, but let's let the local police of jurisdiction or let the RCMP know about this, or like they make determinations around where information should go and what should be done with it every day, all the time, on a whole bunch of different information. And being overly prescriptive is not the ideal way of doing things. But in this case, I think it was a fine thing to do.
Okay, that's fair. The next topic I want to ask you about then is providing classified information to about foreign interference, of course, to party leaders, leaders of political parties or cleared representatives of political parties, as the case may be. The first question I'll ask is fairly general, but when you as a party leader receive information about potential foreign interference happening within your own party, what can you do about it? What are the options available to you in such a scenario?
Well, there are many, many things I can do. If it comes early enough in the process, I can simply disallow a candidate from running for a nomination or to be a candidate in my political party. And a party leader, all party leaders have ultimate discretion because Elections Canada requires that the party leader signs off on every single one of the 338 candidates they can run across the country in an election. And withholding that signature from a particular candidate is one of the core responsibilities, or that signature is a core responsibility and powers of a party leader. And it happens at an early enough stage that if someone expresses even publicly that they want to run for the party and don't end up running for the party, there's not necessarily a scandal around them not running. There could be some sour grapes. There could be, oh, I just had to decide to stick with, family was more important or anything. It's all sorts of face-saving ways in which if a leader quietly says, no, there have been concerns raised, you're not going to be able to run for us, but we don't need to talk about it publicly, you can go back to your life. That is a very effective way of having things done that don't require revealing of any classified information, but is based on intelligence that a leader can get. Once someone's an actual MP, a party leader cannot fire an MP. MPs were elected by Canadians. All a party leader can do is, at the largest level, remove them from their party caucus, have them sit as an independent, something that I've done many times for a range of different reasons around sexual misconduct or other things. That's the biggest tool a party leader has. But there's also other tools. If there is an allegation around, to use the National Security and Intelligence Advisor's words herself, around inappropriate behavior or poor judgment or untrustworthiness, As a party leader, I can decide which committees an individual sits on or doesn't sit on, whether I give them a critic role or a parliamentary secretary role or even a minister's role. We have many tools to respond depending on the seriousness of the allegation. If it's that they're overly friendly with a particular consul general, maybe we just say, yeah, you know what, you need to clean that up. And then maybe we can revisit a committee or parliamentary secretary role for you in a couple of years or in a year if the CSIS comes back and says, no, yeah, there's been no contact there or anything like that. There's lots of tools that a party leader can exert to counter real or risks of foreign interference in their party. But it requires the leader to actually be able to receive the classified information from the intelligence agencies to then turn around and take action on that.
Okay. On that topic, I'm going to ask you what happens when you receive intelligence about potential foreign interference having to do not with your own party, but with opposition parties. To do that, I'll ask the court registrar to pull up CAN 047007. So we'll just go through the document to situate us a little bit, and then I'll ask you to pull up a different one. So Prime Minister, this is a memo for you from your NSIA in May 2024. You'll see what it says at the beginning of that summary is intelligence details alleged foreign interference activities in Canada directed at opposition parties. Given the serious nature of the allegations, PCO is working with CSIS to develop top secret level briefings for opposition parties on this intelligence, then speaks to various political parties and whether or not they have leaders who are security cleared. And then the last bullet there speaks to PCO sharing a protocol of regarding more regular classified briefings to recognize parties. If we can scroll down again, please. I'll tell you when to stop. Scroll through the background. I think we want to get to page 3. There we go. PCO comment there. So PCO notes that the informing the party leaders could allow them to identify the issues, take any necessary action, and then says an ad hoc approach of sharing intelligence is not ideal, and we should maybe think about doing something more systematic. So if we can take that document down now and put up WIT 164, paragraph 25. This is the publicly disclosable version of the conversation that was had in camera about this. So I'd like it up as a reference point. And I'll just ask you, Prime Minister, to take us through from your recollection what happened here, what the situation was, and what was done about it.
In paragraph 26, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I received what I characterize here as explosive, certainly extremely alarming information around foreign interference into a particular political party. And I directed CSIS to try or the intelligence agencies to try and ensure that the opposition parties had the tools to respond to these allegations, or had at least the information that would allow them to do this. I have to be really careful about what I say here because this is all very, very sensitive, and even talking about which party these allegations aimed at is something I'm trying to avoid doing.
Fair enough. And I won't ask you many more questions about them because we are treading very thin lines here. The only thing I'll just sum up by saying, so essentially information came to your attention and it was through the system put to the right people in the right places.
I think it is perhaps useful to point out, we don't need to pull it up, but in the, two things. First of all, I'm Prime Minister, so I receive tremendous amount of classified information covering a broad range of individuals across this country, including in different political parties. But as leader of the Liberal Party, it is awkward, to say the least, to use a mild word, for me to be engaging in who should run or what consequences or who should be a critic or who should be in what position for an opposition party. So as you pointed out earlier, the answer was to offer classified briefings to all the leaders of the parties so that they could best be positioned to take the necessary actions to protect their MPs, some of whom might be vulnerable, some of whom might be witting or unwitting around foreign interference, and therefore demonstrate to Canadians that the integrity of their parties and the protection of their parties from federal foreign interference was done, and that was all I can know about it. I don't act on that stuff because I don't believe in the partisan using national security information for partisan purposes, nor should any prime minister. But informing the leader so they can take proper actions is, I think, the right way of doing things. Stepping away from this specific example, because I don't want to weigh into this.
You can take it down.
Example. Because I am Prime Minister and privy to all these informations, I have the names of a number of parliamentarians, former parliamentarians and/or candidates in the Conservative Party of Canada who are engaged or at high risk of, or for whom there is clear intelligence around foreign interference. And I have directed CSIS and others to try and inform the Conservative Party leader to be warned and armed to be able to make decisions that protect the integrity of that party, of its members, from attempts at foreign activities around foreign interference. And the decision by the leader of the Conservative Party to not get those classified briefings means that nobody in his party, not him, and nobody in a position of power knows the names of these individuals and can take appropriate action. It also means nobody's there to stand up for those individuals if the intelligence is shoddy or incomplete or just allegations from a single source. And that is something that as you've seen, we are ready to question intelligence when it comes towards the Liberal Party members, because we need to make sure if you're going to end someone's career, you're doing it in a responsible way. The decision of the leader of the Conservative Party to not receive the necessary clearance to get those names and protect the integrity of his party is bewildering to me and entirely lacks common sense. Particularly when you look at the NSICOP report that clearly lays out, the public NSICOP report that clearly lays out that in both of the most recent Conservative leadership races, there was foreign interference. The fact that there seems to be absolutely no curiosity or openness in trying to figure out what happened or whether someone was compromised or whether a foreign country impacted those leadership races is simply irresponsible. The fact that we see and I'm getting a little more partisan than I've tried to in this case, but it is so egregious to me that the leader of the official opposition, who is certainly trying very hard to become prime minister, is choosing to play partisan games with foreign interference and accusations on foreign interference, but not taking it the least bit serious as regards to his own responsibilities as party leader, or even to get top officials within his party briefed up as they bring on candidates from across the country, is inexplicable and, quite frankly, concerning. So stepping back from that, our recommendation, and certainly one of the things that is alluded to in some of these reports, and certainly the Commission's work can be, is to indicate that it would probably be pretty important that, as a matter of course, party leaders, certainly of the main political parties, maybe not the Marxist-Leninist candidate that runs against me every election in Papineau, but certainly the main political parties, be given security briefings and clearances that allow them to respond to the very real threats that we have seen of foreign interference in their parties, and that top officials at the party level, as Jeremy Broadhurst was by dint of his day job in my government outside of the campaign period, was able to take that information and discuss with me the consequences that should be meted out, or whether action should be taken or not. It is, I think, a vulnerability to foreign interference that we have as a democracy that some party leaders have decided not to get access to some names that would be very germane for them to at least know and understand the risks around.
Okay, well, we have heard evidence through the Commission's proceedings that foreign interference affects or can affect all political parties. That's certainly true. In terms of providing information to political parties, what about there have been other ideas suggested of how classified information might be provided? For instance, if the leader is a privy councillor, would that entitle them to receiving such information?
There are privy councillors who were sworn in the 70s. As an example, Marco Mendicino was made a privy councillor when he became a minister. But now that he is no longer a minister, in order to appear before this commission and to deal with documents that he himself had generated and worked with as minister, he needed to get security cleared once again. There is a perception around this town that being a privy councillor allows for a higher degree of security clearance or access to documents than not being a privy councillor is. In concrete terms, ministers have access to secure documents by dint of their roles of ministers and go through a vetting process that clears them for that before they are appointed ministers. But having been a minister years ago does not give you any inherent ability to see classified documents without re-upping or reinstating a security clearance.
Okay. Well, we'll leave that topic for now and go to, I'll ask the registrar to pull up the CSIS IR, which I've lost the doc ID. Can doc 44, please? So, Prime Minister, this is the questions I want to ask you around this are about the Commission, and it does relate a little bit to the last point you were making, but the Commission essentially asked the government in its proceedings to come up with a list of the significant instances of foreign interference in Canada's democratic institutions and electoral processes over the period of the Commission's review. And this exercise sort of seems brought everyone around the table, considering what was initially a longer list produced by CSIS, and what was eventually obtained was a consensus list of these 6 instances. And many of the incidents that we've heard about over the Commission's proceedings are actually not on this list, but there are 6 that are there. So the first thing I'll ask you is specific, and then I'll actually go to some more general ones. But in terms of being informed about instances as a party leader, on the second bullet there on that list reads, reporting indicates that a foreign government undertook several actions, including interference, to reduce the likelihood of a specific Liberal candidate from being elected federally. It is suspected that the foreign government sought to thwart the candidate's bid, given their support for issues perceived to be contrary to the foreign government's interests. And am I correct in saying that this never came to your attention, this particular instance, before the Commission's proceedings?
Yes, the list of 6 were all, I expected that, as I said, I have access to regular intelligence briefings and updates on these things. It was surprising to me to see number 2 on this list, because I had no idea. And there are lots of details about this that I know that I continue to be astonished that I was not apprised of this, because it was relevant in a whole bunch of different ways and would have been very relevant at the time. But I also understand, without being able to give too much timing or details around this, that processes we have in place now would have meant that there is no doubt I would have been informed about this incident were it happening now. When it happened, we did not have the measures that we have subsequently put in place.
Okay, understood. So this is one you would have liked to see.
Yes, I would have liked to have seen this one.
Another thing we've heard about the development of this list is, as I said, it brought deputy ministers around the table having conversations about whether some of the instances were or were not foreign interference. And you mentioned earlier in your remarks that there can be different perspectives across government on whether activities are really standard diplomatic activity, for example, or foreign interference. How do you see those debates happening from your vantage point as Prime Minister, first sort of in the existential sense? Like, is this a good thing? And when does it come to you, and what do you see? Are different perspectives brought to your attention, or how does this play out?
I think it is a very, very good thing that on something as important and sensitive as foreign interference by another state, that there be different perspectives looking at it. As I said, our diplomats in the United States were very alert to, which members of Congress or which governors might be helpful in making a case for a more successful NAFTA renegotiations than others. And that involved a lot of sort of conversations and looking into voting records and, quiet lunches by diplomats in place, and that gathering information on foreign parliamentarians is a core part of diplomacy. And that can be foreign influence, which is something that diplomats are actually hired to do and is a primary job around the country, make sure that the government of the country that you're in representing Canada looks favorably upon Canada. Without crossing into interference. Now, it is possible to use information collected for purposes of influence to then turn around and use it for interference. If a diplomat were to collect the home address of a particular parliamentarian to be able to send them a personal note or a Christmas card that didn't go through the office, that would seem, okay, I'm trying to influence them, make them friendly. That's the work of diplomacy. If that foreign address, that home address was then used to organize a massive intimidation protest in the street in front of that person, paid for by a foreign country, that would be foreign interference, or that would be much more serious. So there is a bit of a continuum on this, and having discussions between Global Affairs Canada diplomats and intelligence agencies and spies and on the push-pull of what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, what is problematic, is more of an art than a science. I mean, it can involve intent, it can involve whether it's a friendly country doing it or an unfriendly country doing it, why they're doing it, what preoccupations there are. There is nuance that is not just across departments, but even within departments. You can have different people within global affairs having a different perspective on that. And all those debates and discussions, I think, are a strength of our system that allow us to come to much more thoughtful answers or measures to take in complex and perhaps delicate situations. So, having those engaged, thoughtful debates in government, and even, quite frankly, to a certain extent, understanding that there are complexities in it for a public engaging with how to protect ourselves from foreign interference is very key. I think of the Baltic states example, when Canada positioned itself as the country lead on the enhanced forward presence in NATO by positioning troops in Latvia. One of the things that we learned about very quickly was the incredibly robust system that citizens in Latvia had to detect and deter and render ineffective Russian disinformation, because Russia is constantly flooding the zone in the Baltic states. And they have a very sophisticated and attentive population in knowing that this piece of information is just Russian propaganda or disinformation, that I think Canada is moving towards. But we are not as far forward as some other countries may be in terms of detecting misinformation and disinformation from hostile state actors.
So when these different perspectives may exist in government, do your officials make you aware of them so that you know that maybe CSIS has a different view on something from GAC?
Yes.
Does this come to your attention?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. Either actually in person by watching the director of CSIS and the deputy minister of Foreign Affairs, have a conversation back and forth about a particular thing, or it is obvious in the briefings come to me where it says CSIS leans on this way, but the diplomats say that this might be it, and at the same time, the clerk's decision is this. One of the reasons that I've said I prefer to have active, engaged discussions around intelligence is it allows us to challenge and bring together those different points of view and different perspectives to get a better picture than simply one document that perhaps summarizes different elements, but is written by one person in one department and not another.
Madame la commissaire, je vois que j'ai...
Madam Commissioner, I see that I'm out of time, but I have still two topics to tackle with the Prime Minister, if you allow me. Yes, go ahead.
So the next, I do have a couple of more questions to ask you. The next one is on a different topic now. It's something that we spoke about at great length in camera. So I think we'll have the Reader's Digest of this conversation today, but the vulnerability of political party processes to foreign interference that has been raised à maintes fois in the Commission's proceedings. And we know that Elections Canada will soon be making some suggestions or recommendations as to things that might be done to ameliorate this situation. Can you give us your viewpoint on the idea of increased oversight or increased regulation of internal political party processes for the purpose of dissuading foreign interference?
First of all, there is already oversight and regulations over political parties in Canada that we all understand is important and necessary. I think of the very strict election financing rules, how a political party can raise money, how it is accountable for every dollar it raises, from whom it receives money, what it can spend the money on, how it needs to account for it. That's a really important principle that applies to all political parties and is sort of foundational for our democracy. So the idea that in our democracy we should regulate political parties is well established, that yes, there are many things in which it's important to uphold the freedom and openness of our democracy, that we regulate political parties. In C70, we actually indicate with greater clarity and legislate around foreign interference in political parties as being illegal. I mean, these are things that, yes, there are certainly things that governments and our democracy should do to ensure the accountability and responsibility of political parties. However, when we get into the issue of determining how a political party picks its candidates, or who gets to be the ultimate decision maker in a political party, or how to structure a political party internally, or how to run its nominations, we get into an area that I think one needs to tread very, very carefully. I mean, one of the things we see first in authoritarian countries like Venezuela, to use an extreme example, is the government regulating what opposition parties can do or say, or how they can organize themselves, or how they fund their fundraise. Is a great way for a party in government to control and render ineffective opposition parties. And that is the last thing that we would ever want in Canada. I think it's extremely important that political parties have a large degree of autonomy in their country, in their operations, independence in how they choose to operate and function as political parties, as opposition parties particularly. But that comes with it a responsibility by those political parties to be able to demonstrate the processes in place that they have to reassure Canadians, but particularly their members, that they are not arbitrary, they are not subject to whims or influence or interference by foreign interests or special interests across the country. That's why, for example, in our party, we have nomination races that have very clear requirements that need to be hit within the party frame. We have an appeals process for anyone who loses a nomination. We have scrutineers and lawyers that every party gets to have on every candidate's team gets to have in the nomination process to ensure that it's a rigorous process. We have created many, many mechanisms like that because, the Liberal Party has had nomination races of 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people contesting for a single nomination. Sorry, 6,000, 7,000 members supporting a handful of candidates contesting for a particular nomination. Are there things that can be done to give political parties more information, better access to it? Well, the first one is making sure people, at least someone in a decision-making position at the top of the party structure, the party organization, the campaign director or someone like that, gets the necessary security clearance so that if CSIS or others see flags, they can carry that to the party or inform the leader about it so the leader can make sure that the processes, whether it's a leadership race or a nomination race, can account and say publicly, this was not interfered with. I think it's on the party itself to demonstrate the measures it has taken to protect itself from interference, rather than a government or even Elections Canada weighing in and saying, you have to do this, this, this to protect from foreign interference. I think it is better for Canadians and media and oppositions to be calling out where a party does not have robust processes in place and is not taking seriously the threats of foreign interference. But overly prescribing or regulating the organization, the behaviors, the structure, the decision-making processes within parties by what is necessarily one party in a position of power in government is something that I think requires a lot of caution. But there are many things that could be recommended for parties to take on as tools to keep them safe that I'm certainly hoping that Elections Canada and the Commission's work will highlight that are important principles for how parties can protect themselves from interference.
Okay. Moving now to a topic that you've raised on a couple of occasions already in your remarks, but not completely directly, is the classified NSICOP report. So as you may know, the Commission was charged with looking into the NSICOP report and has done so. And we've heard some evidence over that process. I'll highlight a couple of things that came out from that process and that investigation. One of them is some questions raised as to the strength of the conclusions that NSICOP expressed versus the strength of the assessments that CSIS actually made. So NSICOP's conclusions are NSICOP's, not CSIS's. There were also instances in which some discrepancies may have been found between the conclusions again made and the underlying intelligence. We've heard concerns in these proceedings from two of your former minister, Mr. Mendocino, current minister, Minister LeBlanc, about the strength of the public reaction to the NSICOP report. I'm wondering if you can comment on that, having, of course, read the classified NSICOP report and having knowledge of its contents.
I created the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians for a very specific purpose: to make sure the parliamentarians from all different parties would be able to look into everything that our national security agencies are doing, with at least two clear goals. One is to make sure that our national security agencies are behaving appropriately and not violating Canadians' fundamental rights or overreaching or doing the bidding of one particular government versus the well-interests of Canadians. Just about every one of our democratic major democracy partners has oversight by parliamentarians of their national security agencies. Canada did not, and the previous Conservative government refused to even begin to entertain the idea that parliamentarians should have the ability to oversee national security agencies. I felt strongly that we needed that, and that's why it was one of the first things that we did or worked on in terms of national security. The second reason NSICOP is important is the first reason is to make sure there's not overreach into, and there's other mechanisms as well, like NCIRA, to make sure there's not overreach into Canadians' fundamental rights. But the second is to make sure that national security agencies are taking seriously all the threats and acting in appropriate ways to counter the threats. But being a body that has only come into being about 8 years ago, and being one, or less than that, 6 years ago, being one that as recently as just a year or two ago in the House of Commons is still contested as to its legitimacy and usefulness, it's still very much in a learning process. It's trying to figure out how to manage a very multi-partisan structure in a highly polarized and partisan environment. When it comes to something like foreign interference, that is such a contentious and worrisome topic that you can imagine that any pronouncement that gets out, whether it's a criminal leaking information to the newspaper or NSICOP, putting out a report, or this commission's televised hearings, is generating a lot of interest. Did NSICOP get everything right in its report? As CSIS pointed out, there were some discrepancies. But I don't think that's automatically a bad thing. I think that's part of making sure there are different tools and different perspectives and different organizations working on similar challenges from different things. Yes, there's some of the things that NSICOP put in there that I really would have rather they didn't frame that way, because it worried Canadians and talked about traitors in Parliament, when that is not the assessment that our intelligence agencies put forward. But it's salacious and it sells newspapers and it worries Canadians, so it got put to the fore. I see this more as part of growing pains of building mature, not just institutions around national security within and around government and parliament, but of part of the learning process that citizens get to be part of in figuring out how to talk about real threats and how to evaluate in our democracy, where the lines are and how to best protect our democracy without harming the exact things that make us a free and open democracy. And those are sophisticated conversations that can't just happen within governments or within commissions, but can and should happen as part of active, engaged debate, discourse, and political conversations between elections and during elections. So yeah, there's some things that I feel, certainly with all the perspective I have and all the direct briefings I have from CSIS, that they didn't get quite right. But I much rather have an effective and confident NSICOP committee that goes forth and draws its conclusions and says things that we will all learn to say, okay, yeah, they got this right. They maybe were off a little bit on this, but this helps us advance this understanding. And CSIS was able to come out and correct the record on this. And some of the things that NSICOP talked about, CSIS had actually made a little bit of a mistake. And that was where NSICOP's report was. So that's thoughtful as well. So for me, it's all part of a system that is robust and serious, but because we're in a open, free democracy that stands up for everyone's rights, that is working hard to get it right, but that we don't always need to expect perfection from. And when, as consumers of intelligence materials, individuals and media and opposition parties become more and more experienced at it, more thoughtful about it, Canada will be even better served than we are right now in the important debates we have around foreign interference.
So maybe it's not about getting everything right, but contributing to the building of a national discourse.
Absolutely. Although it'd be nice to get more things right too at the same time.
Fair enough. Madame la Commissaire, ce sont mes questions.
Those are all my questions, Madam Commissioner. Thank you very much.
For Michael Chong. I see Commission Counsel has taken an extra 30 minutes in her examination pursuant to the O'Connor rule.
18.
I thought we were finishing at 11:50.
Clock says 18.
It's okay. Just go on. Tell me.
Okay, well, we'll figure out exactly how much extra, but pursuant to the O'Connor rule that governs in this proceeding, that extra time should be allocated to the parties for their cross to ensure that Commission Counsel's time and the parties' time is equal. So I'm asking that we be given that extra time. We'll have to figure out between ourselves how to allocate it, but I wanted to bring that to your attention straight away.
Okay, let me look into this issue at lunchtime, but we'll let you know through an email.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So we'll take a shorter break today, so lunch today. So make sure to come back at no later than 1:20.
Order, please. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. The sitting of the commission is now in recess until 1:20 p.m. Cette séance de la commission est maintenant suspendue jusqu'à 13h20.
routine. But on top of that, usually at least